Hi everyone, A Loving Soul here. I hope this video finds you well. Today we're going to be talking about building powerful budget decks that you can play in the wild format. I am personally a budget player at heart, and I know it can be difficult to build new decks in Hearthstone due to dust constraints. My goal here is to let you experience some of the strongest decks in the meta at a fraction of the cost. Let's get into it. Let's start off by establishing some ground rules. For our budget decks, we're not going to have any epics or legendaries in these example deck lists, except for a couple at the end where I think budget players can access very powerful deck archetypes with only one legendary in the deck list. Second, the max dust cost of these deck lists will be well under 2,000. And third is a very important point, which I think many budget deck lists dig themselves into a hole where they can't be easily upgraded. I will be giving suggestions for how to upgrade these deck lists into something you would feel comfortable piloting at the very top of the ladder. The first deck list we'll be featuring is a budget Zoo Warlock, which is a personal favorite of mine for only 1400 dust. If you don't know what Zoo Warlock is, it is an archetype of Warlock that focuses on early board control with cheap minions with the ability to refill your hand with the Warlock Hero Power Life Tap. This particular Zoo Warlock deck list focuses on two main themes. As a light discard package, which is powered by Malkazar's Imp, a 1-mana 1/3 minion that has very respectable stats with the ability to draw cards when you discard them, which allows you to take advantage of cards like Soulfire and Doomguard. The second theme in this deck list are eggs and sticky death rattles. You take advantage of these cards with synergy cards like Evil Genius and Power Overwhelming. Now let's talk about tech card options that you can put in this Zoo Warlock list. Since Zoo is such a lean and cheap deck, it works really well with techs for the metagames that you're playing this deck list in. So I've listed a couple of options here. First, let's talk about Acidic Swamp Ooze. This is a great card because it's available to everyone as part of the classic basic set. It's a 2-mana 3/2, which is great stats while also being able to destroy your opponent's weapon. Next, we have Galakar Caller. If you're seeing a bunch of pirates on the ladder, this is the card you want to include in your Zoo deck list. It's a 2-mana 2/3 with no effect, but if there's a pirate on board, it can take it out while becoming a 3/4. Perfectly great. I think that's what I like about tech cards in my deck lists, that even in the worst case scenario, they're still perfectly respectably statted minions. And next, let's bridge on to Silverware Golem. And this is where I want to talk about Zoo Warlock not having an upgrade path that's completely mandatory. I think this Zoo Warlock list is pretty much optimal, however you can tune which flavor of the deck you want to focus on. For example, if you want to focus more on the discard package, you can include a card like Silverware Golem, which summons itself when you discard it. However, if you really like the Egg and Death Rattle package, maybe you can include cards that can proc your Death Rattles, something like Grim Rally. Now let's talk about possible upgrades. Like I was mentioning earlier, I don't think this Zoo deck list has a real upgrade path. I think it's already pretty much good on its own. However, one card you might want to look into if you've pulled it by pack perchance is the Solarium. It's a 1-mana draw 3 spell, which can give the Zoo deck a little bit more fuel. And in the case that you can't play the cards, if you have a Malkazar's Imp on board, you can use those discarded cards as fuel instead. Just a fun little twist to the deck. It's nothing mandatory. I wouldn't go out of your way to craft the Solarium at all. Now let's talk about our second deck list. We have a budget Pyro Warrior here for only a measly 1320 dust. It's often a misconception that you can't play Pirate Warrior without patches. However, I do want to take some time a little bit later to talk about patches and his role in Wild. So what is this Pirate Warrior deck list all about? I went really heavy in on all of the pirate synergies. The minions really work well together, so cards like Nizal's First Mate and Bloodcell Cultist work together to help you control the board in order to get that early recursive damage into the face. Pirate Warrior really excels at being able to get reach damage into the opponent's face when you do lose control of the board in the mid to late game. So cards like Arcanite Reaper and Kor'kron Elite can help you close out the games even when you're no longer on the board. Now let's talk tech options for Pirate Warrior. We have cards like Mortar Strike, which is another burn option in order to help you close out the game. But sometimes Pirate Warrior struggles with getting around Taunt, so we have a very efficient 2-mana 2/1 Shield Breaker, which helps silence enemy taunt so you can get directly to their face with your weapons. Or if you really want to play even more pirate themed focus, we can include cards like Sky Barge, which is another pirate synergy. It's essentially a bigger version of Ship's Cannon. Now let's talk about possible upgrades for Pirate Warrior. And let's get out of the way. If you want to play Pirate Warrior and you want to upgrade the deck, you really enjoy the Pirate Warrior playstyle, go ahead and craft Patches. He comes out pretty much every game because he summons himself from the deck whenever you play a pirate, so he's your first priority if you want to upgrade Pirate Warrior. Second, I've included an epic, South Sea Captain. He increases the stats of the pirates that you have on the board by +1/+1, and that extra 1 health might not seem like a lot, but can help buff your board out of certain ranges for AoE. And finally, we have cards like Ankar, which is a very strong weapon, so it helps you continue to contest the board while also fetching you gas in the form of resources through pirates. It draws pirates from your deck. Before we continue with the other deck lists, I wanted to give a quick shout out to Patches. He's a very splashable card in many aggressive deck archetypes, and even in decks that don't have class specific pirates like Rogue and Warrior, you'll see other classes like Druid and whatnot play a very light neutral pirate package with South Sea Deckhand and Bloodsail Corsair in order to fetch pirates out of the deck. I've also included Leroy as an honorary pirate. He's a card that you can splash in many aggressive decks as well, and he'll often give you that little bit of reach that you need to close out games. Now let's talk about a deck that plays probably the most differently from the other deck list that I'm going to suggest, which is none other than Secret Mage, which costs 1600 dust. Secret Mage got a lot better this expansion. In the past, it was probably more fragile against aggressive board-based decks, but cards that it got in recent expansions, namely Arcane Flak Mage and Flame Ward, give you AoE options to fight back on the board. The reason why I say Secret Mage plays differently than the other lists is because the secrets give it elements to disrupt the enemy game plan. Cards like Counterspell and Explosive Runes can really make your opponents question and think twice before they make their plays. So the main themes of Secret Mage are 1. The aforementioned enemy disruption, while also having direct burn damage in order to go into the enemy's face. I've included cards like Frostbolt, Medivh's Valet, Cloud Prince, and Fireball to close out games. Now let's talk about tech card options for Secret Mage. The first card we have here is Potion of Polymorph, but I really wanted to represent any secret in general. The fun part about Secret Mage is you can add your own personal flair to the deck by tuning the secret ratios as well as your secret choices. I think one option to consider for a secret is Potion of Polymorph if you're going against a lot of big decks, because you can essentially turn those into a 1/1 sheep. On the right side, we have 2 burn options in Forgotten Torch and Ice Lance. These cards combo with the cards in the deck such as Frostbolt and the aforementioned included burn already in order to help you close out the game against really oppressive control decks where you won't have as many minions on the board because they're going to be AoEing you constantly. Now, what are the go-to upgrades if you really like the Secret Mage playstyle? If you have some dust, the very first card I would go out and craft is Alunith. It's a super powerful draw engine in order to refill your hand when you run out of steam in the mid game. Drawing 3 cards at the end of your turn is extremely powerful. Second, which is a nice to have, I personally don't run Luna in my own deck list in order to save dust. Luna is a nice to have option because it acts as a 3 mana 2/4 in some games. It essentially asks your question, hey, can you deal with my Stargazer Luna? Otherwise, I'm going to draw a couple of cards. But at the end of the day, it's just really a nice to have card if you have some spare dust. But it doesn't really replace Alunith as the true bona fide draw engine. Alright, we have our final pure deck list with budget Mech Paladin at a total of 1860 dust, so a bit more than the others. But it's a very strong deck. It takes advantage of Magnetic, which is a mechanic for mechs. Mechs with Magnetic can attach to mechs or be played as their own unit. We combine this with the Paladin hand buff mechanic with cards like Crime Street Outfitter and Smuggler's Run, and combine that with Magnetic in order to create really big, beefy mechs. So Mech Paladin has this theme of being able to stack buffs on buffs on buffs to create one big, tall mech threat. However, against decks that have really good, strong, single target removal, something like a Mage's Polymorph or Shaman's Hex, you might want to go wide by using the other part of Magnetic, which is you can play those mechs as standalone units. Now let's talk about tech cards for Mech Paladin. I think this budget list is pretty much close to optimal for a budget Mech Paladin, which is why it costs a little bit more than the other deck lists. And as such, I'm not going to suggest too many tech cards here. I think it really is a preference on which draw engine you prefer. You have the option between Divine Favor or Jeeves. Jeeves is a little slower because it comes out at 4 mana, but it also is a mech, so it can be magnetized with your Replicating Menace or War Gear. Pretty much just a couple things to take into account. I don't think there's anything you really have to tech against because Mech Paladin really wants to just play its own game rather than trying to tech against other decks. Now finally, let's talk about upgrades. I think once again, like the tech card section for Mech Paladin, I don't think these upgrades are at all mandatory. Ziliax is typically played in decks that need the lifesteal in order to stabilize, but we're pretty much trying to close the game out pretty early, and if our life total is low, we clearly have bigger problems. Ziliax doesn't hurt to have in a mech deck, obviously. Having Divine Shield allows you to get really good trades on the board. Second, I didn't include Snip Snap in the base list. A lot of players may have gotten Snip Snap for free during the event. However, newer players that come across this video might not have access to Snip Snap. I don't think Snip Snap is mandatory. It's just a nice magnetic option, as well as a good standalone unit because it has Echo, so you can build a medium Snip Snap at 6 mana, or in the late game, play 3 Snip Snaps. Just a couple cards to consider if you already have them in your collection. I wouldn't go out and spend the dust to craft them. So now we have a bonus section for those who are interested in investing a little dust or already have access to Gen Greymane and Baku the Moon Eater. As such, I've added an asterisk to the dust cost, which is subtracting 1600 dust, which is the cost of Gen and Baku respectively from the deck list. Let's start off with Gen Greymane. Gen Greymane rewards you for building a deck with only even mana cost cards by reducing the mana cost of your hero power to 1. So in the case of our even Shaman deck list, we get access to a very powerful 1 mana summon random totem. This even Shaman deck list focuses on a split of some totem synergies as well as overload synergies. The totem synergies in the deck are things like Totemic Surge, which give +2 attack to your totems, as well as cards like Think From Below, which reduces its mana cost for every totem you have summoned during the game. I'll admit that this particular deck list doesn't have as much overload synergy, but I wanted to build it in a way where you could summon a lot of beefy, strong 4-cost cards like Flame Wreath Faceless, which is a 4 mana 7/7, a perfectly strong stat line. It doesn't matter that we don't have too much overload synergy at this point in this budget deck list, but I really wanted to build a strong foundation to work off of. Second, we also have access to Squall Hunter, which is a 4 mana 5/7, which overloads you for 2 mana, and this will buff all of the spells that we have in the deck. So cards like Crackle, Maelstrom Portal, Jade Lightning will benefit from a Squall Hunter sticking on the board. Now let's talk tech card options in Even Shaman. So keep in mind that we are limited to only even cost cards. So we have Galaka Crawler here once again. I think Galaka Crawler is just a perfect fit into Even Shaman. It can help you fight against those really aggressive decks that use the pirate package. And second, we have a card that you could consider isn't really a tech card and might be a core card. I think it really depends on your metagame. I'm talking about Devolve. So Devolve transforms all enemy minions into random ones that cost 1 less. This can be really helpful to get past Taunt if you want to do something like a Wind Fury combo with your Flame Wreath Faceless to get that 14 damage to the face. Now let's talk about possible upgrades for Even Shaman. I think Even Shaman really benefits from upgrades here, especially since we're playing this overload list. I really highly suggest looking into something like Messina, which is a 2/6 that gives essentially Savage Roar a +2 attack to your board whenever you're overloaded mana crystals. I would say it's a 2/6 with Savage Roar on legs, but Messina's a snake, so no legs. Second, we have cards like Sea Giant, which really help you continue developing the board when you have a lot of minions. It lets you sort of seal that board with a nice cheap 8/8 minion. Finally, to round out that overload synergy, we have Thunderhead, which summons a bunch of token minions. This can be comboed Messina in order to get like a bunch of 3/1s in order to help you control the board. I think Thunderhead is mostly an anti-aggro option. It's not as good against control, but it is a strong list if you want to continue playing this overload package. I do want to help plant the seed into your head that there is an up-and-coming deck list or variant of Even Shaman that moves away from the overload package. I think the overload package is still very strong as a budget option. So if you're interested in exploring Even Shaman even further, you may want to look into a more totem-centric Even Shaman. leveraging cards like Splitting Axe, which has the Battle Cry, which summons copies of all of the totems that you have on your board. Now let's move on to the Baku the Moon Eater deck list. So this deck list is only going to cost you 1380 dust if you already have access to Baku the Moon Eater. So Baku the Moon Eater gives Rogue access to a 2/2 dagger rather than a 1/1 dagger. The Odd Rogue deck list that we're featuring today focuses on a lot of fuel. So you want to control the board with that 2/2 dagger and summon a bunch of these cheap minions that we have here. So cards like Bloodsail Flybooter, Firefly, Pharaoh Cat, they're all going to generate resources. And if you can get these minions to stick, I've opted to have a lot of cards that buff up these small minions. So cards like Cobalt Scalebane, which gives 3 attack to a minion at the end of the turn. Crazed Chemist, which has the combo of giving +4 attack to your minions, as well as cards like Fungal Mancer, which gives +2/+2 to 2 minions. So a very simple but elegant deck list that doesn't quite run out of fuel and puts pressure on your opponent. Now let's talk tech options. Obviously for Odd Rogue, we only have access to odd monocost cards, and the first card is an option that shows up in a lot of odd deck lists, not just Rogue, which is Bad Luck Albatross. So what does Bad Luck Albatross do? You're playing it for the Death Rattle, which shuffles 2 albatrosses into your opponent's deck. Now this might be good against most decks. It's kind of annoying. In order to deny your opponent draw, they draw a 1/1 albatross sometime later in the game. However, this is particularly powerful against Reno decks, which only have a single copy of a card in their deck in order to access powerful synergies such as Reno Jackson, which heals their hero back to full HP. By shuffling in these albatrosses, you have the option to deny those very powerful Reno Highlander effects. Second, if your metagame is a little bit more aggressive, you may want cards to help stymie or slow down those aggressive game plans while you're contesting the board. Something like Tar Creeper works particularly well in this Odd Rogue deck list because it can help protect the cheap minions that we're trying to buff up with our cards like Cobalt Scalebane or Crazed Chemist, like I mentioned earlier. Now let's talk about possible upgrades for Odd Rogue. So in the first slot, we have Leroy Jenkins, a fantastic odd cost addition to many aggressive decks. It just gives us that last bit of reach in order to close out games. That's something that you'll find that Odd Rogue is a little lacking in that department. It doesn't have quite as much burn as the other deck lists that we featured in this video, such as Secret Mage or Pirate Warrior. So Leroy Jenkins really helps out in that department. Second, even though it's not on this infographic that I made, is I want to bring up patches. Patches in the pirate package is very solid. It helps us do all the things that we want to do. We're already playing a lot of pirates, so it doesn't hurt to include patches in the deck list. Next, we have Vile Spineslayer, a very efficient statted minion. It's a 5 mana 3/4, but it comes essentially with a free assassinate, so it can take out big taunts or big minions that you would unnecessarily have to sacrifice your board. You can keep that tempo and keep pushing damage without having to trade into your enemy's minions. And finally, we have Magic Carpet. Magic Carpet has really shaped Odd Rogue deck lists in recent expansions in that it turns the 1-cost minions that we're putting into our deck. This can be very good in aggressive matchups. Decks like Zoo or whatnot really hate to see Magic Carpet come down because it has such a thick body. It's a 3 mana 1/6 that's very difficult to deal with, especially with all of these cheap tokens taking out their minions. So Magic Carpet, super solid against board-based decks, and these are all very solid upgrades for the Odd Rogue strategy. So let's round off this video with none other than Odd Paladin. So for including only odd monocost cards, Baku the Moon Eater rewards us with the Silver Hand hero power, which summons 2 1/1 recruits rather than 1. So this is obviously very powerful because it gives you the ability to constantly refill wide boards by just clicking the button. So for this particular Odd Paladin list, I focused on including some of the new cards from recent expansions, cards like Never Surrender, Righteous Cause, which buff up your board and protect it against AoE. We combine this with some cheap cards like Raid Leader and Frostwolf Warlord in order to either help push damage to the face, so taking advantage of those wide boards, but in Frostwolf Warlord's case, he gets bigger based on how many minions we have on the board. Now let's talk about tech card options for Odd Paladin. First off, Odd Paladin is a little different than other decks. It can really take advantage of tech cards because it has access to Divine Favor. It's a 3 mana draw card which allows you to draw cards until your hand size matches your opponent. This, combined with the Silver Hand, allows you to fill the board without committing too many resources and really take advantage of tech cards in your hand. So the first tech card we're going to be showcasing here is Ironbeak Owl, a cheap 3 mana silence. This can be really good, especially in the metagame where there's a lot of mechs that magnetize and get really tall. Sometimes those mechs have taunt, so you can just say, hey, Ironbeak Owl, now you got to deal with my board. The next card that we're showcasing for a tech option is Faceless Corruptor. This is pretty powerful even though it's been nerfed from a 5/4 to a 4/4, but a 4/4 with Rush that turns one of the spare token cards that we have on our board into a rushing 4/4, that can't be understated. It's a really great way to get back on the board, which is one of Odd Paladin's weaknesses when your opponent has board control. Now let's talk about possible upgrades for Odd Paladin. If you have some dust and you really like the Odd Paladin strategy, the first thing you must craft is Quartermaster. It not only helps you build the board because it has stats on its own, it gives you +2/+2 to all of your Silver Hand recruits. It's like a super version of Fungalmancer for this deck. It's amazing. It helps get your Silver Hand recruits out of certain harm's way of AoE. Combine that with the other buffs that we already have in the deck, like the Never Surrenders and the Righteous Causes, you can cause a lot of pain to your opponent. The next tech card we have here is Corridor Creeper. Since we have so many cheap tokens that might be wiped out from AoE, we need ways to re-establish our presence back onto the board, and that's where Corridor Creeper comes in. That 5 health stat helps it stick onto the board and pave the way for us to rebuild our board again. And while we don't have these tech cards listed on the infographic, they're just things to keep in mind, so you can once again include the Pirate package into Paladin if you already have access to that, and you can also possibly consider cards like Leroy Jenkins just to give us a little bit more burst to close out games. I hope you guys got some value out of these budget deck lists. I'm pretty much a budget player at heart. I really always want to be able to get the essence and soul of a deck, be able to get about 80 to 90% of the operating value, and upgrade those budget decks when I get the chance. So I think for like under 2,000 dust, you're going to have a lot of fun with these deck lists. They're very strong contenders in the current metagame. And once again, all of the deck codes are in the description below. If you really got something out of this video, feel free to comment and start a discussion in the comments below. Subscribe to my channel if you want to see more informative Hearthstone content, or just to see me play these decks on the ladder themselves. I already have some videos of the optimal version of these deck lists on my channel, so feel free to check those out. And I wish you the best of luck in Hearthstone and in life. And until next time, peace.